February 14th, 1951, 10:33 p.m., Jimmy Malone, the man who'd betrayed Bumpy Johnson 8 years earlier, sat down at table 12 in Small's Paradise and started apologizing. The straight razor came out 90 seconds later. Wait, because when Jimmy left that table, he had a red line running ear to ear across his left cheek, and every person in Harlem who saw it would know exactly what it meant. To understand what happened at table 12, you need to understand what Jimmy Malone did in 1943. Bumpy Johnson ran the numbers racket in Harlem, policy banks on every corner, collectors on every block, protection for every business that needed it. Jimmy Malone was Bumpy's right hand. 15 years together, they'd started as kids, running numbers for Madam Queen. By 1943, they controlled 60% of Harlem's underground economy. That's $200,000 a week flowing through their operation. In 1943 dollars, the police wanted a piece, the Italians wanted it all, and Jimmy Malone made a decision. September 12th, 1943, the NYPD raided Bumpy's headquarters on 125th Street. They found everything: ledgers, cash, names, policy slips going back 3 years, evidence that should have been impossible to find because it was hidden in 3 separate locations across Harlem. Bumpy got 18 months at Sing Sing. When he got out in March 1945, Jimmy Malone was gone. Here's what most people in Harlem didn't know. Jimmy hadn't just disappeared. He'd taken $75,000 from Bumpy's operation and moved to Detroit, set up his own numbers game, changed his name to James Morrison, bought a house, got married, thought 8 years and 600 miles was enough distance. He was wrong. Bumpy Johnson spent those 18 months in prison reading Shakespeare, Sun Tzu, The Art of War. He didn't talk about Jimmy Malone, didn't threaten, didn't make promises. He just read. And when other inmates asked him what he'd do when he got out, Bumpy said the same thing every time: a man's got to live with his choices. That's the thing about Bumpy. He didn't react emotionally, he calculated. While other men were playing checkers, making threats they couldn't keep, Bumpy was playing chess, 3 moves ahead, always. March 1945. Bumpy walked out of Sing Sing. The first thing he did was rebuild his operation. Not with revenge, with strategy. He consolidated the policy banks Jimmy had left scattered. He made new arrangements with the Italians. He promoted men who'd stayed loyal. Within 6 months, Bumpy controlled 75% of Harlem's numbers game, more than before Jimmy's betrayal. The second thing Bumpy did was send word through the underworld. Quiet word. Professional. If anyone sees Jimmy Malone, tell him I'm not looking for him. Tell him he's free. That message traveled. Detroit, Chicago, Philadelphia, Baltimore, everywhere Jimmy might hear it. And for 6 years, Jimmy heard it and stayed gone. He built his Detroit operation to $30,000 a week. He had a wife, 2 kids, a house in a good neighborhood. He thought he was safe. Or maybe he thought Bumpy had forgiven him. Maybe he thought 8 years was enough time for the debt to fade. Maybe he convinced himself that the message was genuine, that Bumpy Johnson really wasn't looking for him. He was wrong about that too. February 11th, 1951. 3 days before Jimmy walked into Small's Paradise, this is what Jimmy didn't know. A man named Thomas Fletcher walked into Bumpy's office above the Apollo Theater. Thomas ran numbers in Detroit. Small operation, 7 guys. Thomas had information. Jimmy Morrison's real name is Jimmy Malone. Thought you should know. Bumpy looked at Thomas for a long moment. You came all the way from Detroit to tell me this. I came because I remember what Jimmy did to you. And I remember you saying if anyone saw him, tell him he's free. Bumpy nodded slowly, reached into his desk, pulled out $500 bills. You did the right thing, Thomas. This is for your trouble. He slid the money across the desk. Then he pulled out 5 more bills. This is for making a phone call. Thomas made the call that afternoon. To Jimmy Malone in Detroit. "This is Thomas Fletcher. I know who you really are, and I know Bumpy Johnson's looking for you." Jimmy's voice went quiet on the other end. "What's he want?" "He wants you to come to New York, Small's Paradise. February 14th, 10 o'clock. He says come alone, apologize face to face, and the debt's settled. Otherwise, he's coming to Detroit." Jimmy Malone made a decision. He believed it. Or maybe he just believed he didn't have a choice. He told his wife he had business in New York. He packed a bag. He practiced his apology in the mirror. He convinced himself that Bumpy Johnson, after 8 years, might actually let it go. February 14th, 1951. Small's Paradise on 135th and 7th Avenue. The club was packed. 300 people. Valentine's Day. The jazz band, 7 pieces, full brass section, was playing Duke Ellington. Couples danced. Drinks flowed. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and expensive perfume. Table 12 sat in the back corner. Best table in the house. Private but visible. Bumpy Johnson sat there every Thursday night. Same table, same time. Everyone in Harlem knew it. At 10:33 p.m., Jimmy Malone walked through the front door. The room didn't go silent. Not immediately. But people noticed. The word spread in whispers. "That's Jimmy Malone. I thought he was dead. Bumpy's gonna kill him." Jimmy wore a new suit. Charcoal gray. Expensive fabric, probably $300. His shoes were shined. His tie was straight. He looked like a man who'd done well for himself, or like a man trying very hard to look like he had. He walked to table 12. Bumpy sat with his back to the wall, glass of whiskey untouched in front of him, wearing his trademark gray fedora. 2 of Bumpy's men stood nearby, big guys, watching. Jimmy stopped at the table. "Bumpy, can I sit?" Bumpy gestured to the empty chair. Didn't smile, didn't speak, just watched Jimmy sit down. Jimmy cleared his throat. "I know I don't got the right to ask for much. I know what I did. I've been living with it for 8 years. His hands were shaking slightly. He pressed them flat on the table to steady them. "I came to say I'm sorry. Face to face. Man to man. What I did in 43. There's no excuse for it. I was scared. The police were closing in, and I thought." "You thought you'd give them me instead of yourself," Bumpy said quietly. His voice was calm, almost friendly. "You thought $75,000 and a new life in Detroit was worth 15 years of loyalty." Jimmy's face went pale. "You knew where I was. I've known where you were since March of 45. Bumpy took a sip of his whiskey, set it down carefully. "Did you think Thomas Fletcher just happened to call you? Did you think he just happened to know your real name?" The realization hit Jimmy's face like cold water. "You sent him." "I sent him." Bumpy leaned back in his chair. "You want to know why I waited 8 years, Jimmy? Why I let you build that little operation in Detroit? Why I let you have a wife and kids and a house?" Jimmy didn't answer. Couldn't, because I wanted you to have something to lose. Bumpy's voice was still calm, almost conversational, like they were discussing the weather. "I wanted you to build a life. I wanted you to feel safe. I wanted you to think maybe you got away with it. And then I wanted you sitting right here in front of me, understanding that you never did." The jazz band played on. 300 people danced and drank and laughed, and at table 12, Jimmy Malone understood he'd made a terrible mistake. "Bumpy, please. You know what it costs to betray someone who trusted you?" Bumpy asked. He wasn't asking for an answer. "It costs everything. Your reputation, your word, your future. But you know what it costs more than anything else?" He paused. "It costs the idea that you're safe, anywhere." Bumpy reached into his jacket. Jimmy flinched. But what Bumpy pulled out wasn't a gun. It was a straight razor, chrome handle, worn grip. The same razor Bumpy's father had given him when he was 16 years old. He placed it on the table between them. "Here's what's going to happen, Jimmy. You're going to sit in that chair. You're not going to move. You're not going to scream. And I'm going to give you something that'll make sure every person in Harlem, in Detroit, in every city you ever go to knows exactly what you did. Bumpy, I got a family. You should have thought about that in 1943. Bumpy picked up the razor, opened it. The blade caught the light from the chandeliers above. "I'm not going to kill you, Jimmy. Death's too easy. You're going to walk out of here. You're going to go back to Detroit. You're going to look at your face in the mirror every single day for the rest of your life, and you're going to remember this moment." Jimmy tried to stand. Bumpy's hand shot out, gripped Jimmy's wrist, slammed it down on the table. The sound echoed, not loud enough to stop the music, but loud enough that people at nearby tables turned to look. "Don't make this worse," Bumpy said quietly. 300 people in Small's Paradise, the band playing, dancers moving, and slowly, table by table, people began to notice what was happening at table 12. The music didn't stop, but the dancing slowed. Conversations dropped to whispers. Bumpy stood up, walked around the table, stood behind Jimmy, put his left hand on Jimmy's shoulder, the razor in his right hand. "This is going to hurt," Bumpy said, "but you've had 8 years to prepare for it." The blade touched Jimmy's left cheek, right below the ear. Jimmy's whole body went rigid. "Don't move," Bumpy said. The razor dragged across Jimmy's cheek, slow, deliberate, ear to jawline, not deep enough to kill, not shallow enough to heal clean, just deep enough to scar. Jimmy didn't scream. Maybe because Bumpy had told him not to. Maybe because 300 people were watching and screaming would make it worse. Maybe because some part of him knew he deserved it. Blood ran down his cheek, dripped onto his new suit, onto the table, into his whiskey glass. Bumpy finished the cut, wiped the blade on a white napkin, folded the razor closed, put it back in his jacket. He walked back to his seat, sat down, picked up his whiskey glass, took a sip. "You can go now," Bumpy said. Jimmy sat there for a moment, hand pressed to his face, blood seeping between his fingers. Then he stood, stumbled, caught himself on the table. The entire club was watching now. 300 witnesses. The band had stopped playing. The dancers had stopped moving. Everyone stared at table 12. Jimmy walked toward the door. Every step, people moved out of his way. Some looked at him with pity. Most looked at him with understanding. They knew what that scar meant. At the door, Jimmy turned back, looked at Bumpy one last time. Bumpy raised his glass slightly. A small gesture, a farewell. Jimmy pushed through the door, into the February night, into the rest of his life with a scar that would never fade. The moment the door closed, the band started playing again. The dancers went back to dancing. Conversations resumed. Life at Small's Paradise continued like nothing had happened. But everyone there remembered. 300 witnesses to table 12. 300 people who would tell the story. And in Harlem, in the numbers racket, in the underworld where reputation was currency, the story spread like wildfire. By the next morning, everyone knew. Policy bankers, street, collectors, hustlers. Jimmy the Weasel, Malone had betrayed Bumpy Johnson in 1943, and in 1951, he'd paid for it. Not with his life, with something worse, a mark that would follow him forever. Jimmy Malone went back to Detroit, but his operation fell apart within 6 months. People wouldn't work for a man with that scar, wouldn't trust a man who'd betrayed Bumpy Johnson. His wife left him when she learned the truth about who he really was. His kids grew up knowing their father was a traitor. He moved to Chicago in 1953, then Philadelphia in 1955, then Baltimore in 1957. Everywhere he went, someone recognized the scar. Someone knew the story. Someone refused to do business with him. In 1962, A reporter doing a story on Harlem's underworld tracked Jimmy down in a Baltimore boarding house, asked him about the scar. Jimmy touched it reflexively. "That's what betrayal costs," he said. "Every single day I see it in the mirror. Every single day I remember table 12. The reporter asked if he regretted betraying Bumpy. Jimmy laughed. It was a hollow sound. "Regret doesn't change anything. Bumpy taught me that. He could have killed me. He didn't. He gave me something worse. He gave me a life where I'd never forget what I did." Here's what the scar at table 12 did for Bumpy Johnson's reputation. It sent a message that spread through every criminal organization in New York. You don't betray Bumpy Johnson. Not for money, not for freedom, not for anything, because if you do, he won't kill you quickly. He'll make sure you live with it. In the years after Table 12, Bumpy's operation grew. By 1955, he controlled 90% of Harlem's numbers game. Men who worked for him knew the rules, loyalty above everything. Break that rule, and you'd end up like Jimmy Malone, a walking warning. The Italians noticed. The police noticed. Other criminal organizations in New York noticed. Bumpy Johnson didn't need to kill people to maintain power. He just needed people to remember Table 12. Years later, in the 1970s, a documentary filmmaker interviewed men who'd been at Small's Paradise that night. One of them, a musician who'd been in the band, said it best. "I've seen a lot in my years in Harlem. I've seen violence. I've seen death. But I've never seen anything like what Bumpy did at Table 12. He didn't just punish Jimmy. He taught everyone watching a lesson about loyalty, and we never forgot it." The straight razor Bumpy used that night stayed in his jacket for the rest of his life. He never used it again. Didn't need to. The story of Table 12 did all the work. Respect isn't given, it's earned. And loyalty isn't just a word, it's a code. Bumpy Johnson understood that better than anyone. And on February 14, 1951, he made sure everyone else understood it too. February 14, 1951. One man sat down to apologize. One man stood up to teach. And Table 12 at Small's Paradise became a legend that Harlem never forgot. If this story hit you, smash that subscribe button. We're telling the Bumpy Johnson stories history forgot. Drop a like if you think loyalty is everything.